The sight of a heavily laden train pulled by two engines grinding along the narrow main street of Fivemiletown must have been impressive in its day. There was a speed restriction of 4 miles an hour, and local residents had to be warned not to join or to leave the carriages while they were moving. The station was at one end of the village. Like the others along the 37 miles between Tynan and Maguire's Bridge, it was constructed of red brick by a Belfast company. It also had an extensive goods yard, now occupied by a creamery, as well as an engine shed and a siding to a pig market. 46 years after the railway's closure, some traces of the line still remain, including a signal and, at the other end of the platform, a large water tank capable of holding 8,500 gallons. The supply at one stage came from a lake about a mile away, and a windmill was used to pump the water to its destination.
Fivemiletown was, of course, the second most important station, and indeed narrowly failed in its bid to be the headquarters of the company at the time of the opening. As you know, Fivemiletown is one of the narrowest main streets in Ulster, and it was quite a scene to see the steam engine battling its way through there, especially on fair days or on market days. You could barely get a horse and cart along either side, so it was quite hectic. And Fivemiletown was a busy little town, always was, had good fares.
Given the fact that the railway virtually never made a profit in its whole existence, I suppose its closure in 1941 was inevitable.
Oh, it was certainly. In fact, it didn't really make any money since about the First World War, and it was kept going on nostalgia and I suppose the hope that the newfangled buses wouldn't really suit the people and they'd go back to the railway. But in fact, it never really paid its way after a few years at the beginning. But nostalgia kept it going, but unfortunately not for long enough.
In the first 25 years of its existence, the railway had carried about 100,000 passengers annually, but this had dropped to 28,500 by 1933 because of the increasing competition from road transport. The management's answer was to complement the steam trains with a diesel railcar. It was built in Wigan at a cost of nearly £2,000 and is now preserved in Belfast.
It first ran on the Clogher Valley in December 1932, I think it was, introduced as an economy measure, and it ran from that to the very last day in December 1941. And in fact, it was the last train on the Clogher Valley Railway, and the last train wasn't a train at all, it was this rail car. But it actually ran into the early hours of 1942, January 1942. But anyhow, in the short time, 9 or 10 years, whatever it was, it did a mileage equal to 12 times round the equator, 300 and something thousand miles. And then it wasn't dead then, although the Clogher Valley was dead. It was sold to the County Donegal railways. And it went there and it ran until the end of 1959 and did another 300,000 miles, 12 times round the equator. And now I'm glad to see it in the County Donegal Railway scarlet and cream livery in the Transport Museum here.
The introduction of the railcar service to the Clogher Valley route was also recalled by Dr. George Gillespie, who has preserved many photographs and posters of the Clogher Valley route, some of which are included in the current exhibition at Fivemiletown Museum. Dr. Gillespie lives at Ballygawley, and from his house he had a good view of all the comings and goings at the nearby station.
It was supposed to be one of the first diesel rail cars in Ireland, I think, and it was bought in 1932. And I remember just after it arrived being in the sheds in Knocknacloy one day, and the manager was very pleased with it because he said that the fuel was only costing 4 halfpenny a gallon, and if he'd one passenger in it was paying his way, so they're going to make their fortune. It just looked like a lorry, and they called it the unit. What it really had been bought for was that when the first diesel required overhaul, they could take the body off it and put it on this thing. But in the end, the unit became a sort of a goods engine. It was used for all sorts of things. And it worked until the very end of the line. It was quite economical.
And the 12th of July specials as well, they were big occasions around here, I'm sure.
They were on the whole line, they only had, I think, about 12 passenger coaches. Well, if they needed 2 trains, they only had 6 passenger coaches for each train. So they added to that a couple of timber trucks with netting wire sides into which the children were packed. And then there'd be 8, maybe 10 cattle wagons into which everyone was crammed. 2 engines, double-headed, and usually a third engine to act as a brake. And remember, the incline out of Ballygall was 1:31, and to hear that thing going up, it was unbelievable. To see it coming down was hair-raising. Some people now say it would have been a great tourist attraction, but they simply couldn't have had it because it ran down the middle of the road and it crossed the roads and corners and simply couldn't have survived.
Do you remember the last service in particular?
I do. I travelled in the last train. I took part in the wake, the last train to Fivemiletown. Every village, nearly everyone climbed on board, went a short distance and then walked back. But people forget now, it's a sort of a joke now, but people forget that when it was opened, it was the lifeline to the country, and it was not by any means a joke then.